Welcome to the Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring all things biochar related, coming to you from a small sheep and tree farm in the deep south of New Zealand. Hi Joany, thank you for joining me today. I would like to start by asking you, who is Joany Grima?
Hi, Dylan. Thanks for having me on your podcast today. I appreciate being invited to have a char chit chat with you. So, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Melbourne, in Australia. I'm the daughter of Maltese migrants. My entire family is from a small island called Gozo in the Mediterranean Sea. I migrated to New Zealand in 2003 after marrying a local, and we live on a rural property in the Akatara Valley in the Wellington region. So we're pretty fortunate here to have some space to grow some of our own food, to forage, raise animals, keep bees, that sort of thing. And of course, we make biochar here. In my work life, I freelance as a project and events manager. I've worked in 10 countries across 6 continents, planning and delivering events for a range of different organizations. And for 10 years, I was an academic that taught event management courses and project management at a polytech called Welltech. And I guess more recently, a lot of my energy has gone into the Good Carbon Farm, which is a New Zealand-based not-for-profit and registered charity that I co-founded with my partner Alan in 2022.
Thank you for your very clear introduction. Can you tell me when you first became aware of biochar? Like, when did it come into your awareness? Do you remember?
I do remember. I remember quite vividly. I first heard about biochar in the same year that we set up the Good Carbon Farm, so 2022, so really not that long ago. Alan broke a pinky finger, of all things, in a work accident that he needed to have surgery on, and then spent a few weeks at home to recover afterwards. And during that time, he borrowed a library book. Well, actually, he borrowed probably a lot of library books, but one specifically about biochar from our local library, and became really interested in what it was and what it could do, and then did a kind of a deep dive, I guess you could call it, into learning all about biochar, which up to then was something that I don't think either of us had heard of before. So, of course, his interest in biochar made an impression on me. I've, for a really long time been concerned about the environment, about climate change, and doing what I can to mitigate my personal impact on the planet, especially in light of all the international travel I've done. So, finding out about this product that anyone really can make by upcycling green waste and storing carbon that would otherwise be re-emitted into the atmosphere from rotting vegetation very much got my attention. So I then went on to do some reading and learning of my own. However, I really struggled, Dylan, and I still do struggle with how technical and scientific the language was in most of the publications I read about biochar and in websites and other resources that I engaged with. And I'm sorry to say I found the information dry and dull, and kind of wondered why something that was one of the solutions needed to address climate change was presented in a way that was, to me, quite boring, when in fact it really is something that's very exciting.
Yes. Yes, I grapple with that too. Yeah, as soon as you do any kind of reading, it gets technical and academic very, very quickly. Yeah, I think somehow we need to get that out there in a simple way. I'm not too sure how. I, of course, do lots of workshops, so I have some ideas about how to get people engaged in it. It's just how to make that into maybe an online resource and maybe put it into a video of some sort. Yeah, I mean, I learned mostly from people doing it on YouTube and watching lots of videos, but I found there was a lot of bad videos as well, and so I guess I'm quite good at sifting through those, but other people might find one or two bad ones and then either follow their advice and do it all pretty negatively, or just give up. So yeah, that's something to consider. Yeah,
Yeah, there's definitely some room for, plain language, very simple resources that just easier to engage with. There's so much information available on everything.
yeah,
So being able, I guess, to take some shortcuts to reliable sources of information that are stimulating
yeah.
is definitely there's a gap, I think, for that sort of thing.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if someone in an elevator asks you what biochar is, what do you tell them if you've got like 25 seconds or something?
25 seconds. Okay. Well, I was once discussing what biochar was with a friend of mine who didn't know about biochar, who is a communications expert. And he sat across from me at lunch as I spoke. And he just listened and nodded and, asked for a clarification now and then. And then he said to me, "So, Joni, what you're saying is when you cook the plant waste that no one wants, science happens, and biochar, which is solid carbon, is born. And then when you put it in your garden, more science happens, making better soil and growing better foods." And I thought, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. So, Dylan, I think that is what I like to think I would tell someone in an elevator, but I don't actually leave the property very often, so don't have a lot of elevator opportunities. But that biochar is carbon made by plants in collaboration with science. And if you want to know more, perhaps Google it and go on your own learning journey.
Hmm. Awesome. Okay, and what's your favorite method of making biochar and why?
My favorite method of making biochar, I think, I don't really have a preference myself because I don't make it. I've not yet made it. Alan has made a little bit of it on our property. I think, however, if I was going to make it, I would prefer to use a retort kiln or a system that is closed. And I say this only because of the optics. I think the average person is challenged by seeing images of people making biochar that involve fire and flames and smoke. And while you and I know the science behind why that is the case and that the processes are controlled, that it is still environmentally beneficial, a good way to repurpose waste biomass, to store carbon, all those things for a lot of people, that's difficult to understand. And again, it's a lot of information to have to engage with in order to reach that understanding.
Okay. So are you saying there that you think biochar has a bit of a negative image because there's burning involved and people picture a lot of flames or and maybe even a lot of smoke? And do you think that's a negative thing that's difficult to explain to people and for people to understand it if they're not au fait with what biochar is all about?
Not a negative thing. I wouldn't use that word. I think more that it's just challenging because if you see an image of flame and smoke, on a pile of twigs or whatever it is, for most people, I mean, they don't know the word biochar, they don't know how it's made, they don't know all the things we know. Just seeing that kind of image, yeah, probably reminds them of a campfire or a bonfire or something like that. They're not necessarily making a connection between that and a climate change solution. So there's the challenge is of joining those dots.
Okay. Yeah. So what do you use biochar for? And if you guys are not making a lot yourself, are you getting it in from somewhere else?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer this question in two parts because we do make a little bit on our property and we use biochar in our food growing gardens that we have here and in our greenhouse as a way of improving our soil. We add it to our worm farm and our compost heap, and we make it also just to give away to other people in our community who are experimenting with it for the first time. And, it's always good to a good conversation starter as well. As far as our biochar for the Good Carbon Farm, it's made by different people around the country who we call our carbon farmers. So we don't really make it ourselves here for the Good Carbon Farm purposes. We use it and to gift it to school and community gardens and to conservation projects that are able to incorporate it into their growing operations. So with the school and community gardens, the biochar is usually added to their compost heap first, which is how we recommend they integrate it, where it will eventually migrate into the food growing beds. And for conservation projects, so things like nurseries and tree planting projects, the biochar is soaked in compost or seaweed tea beforehand and then added into the seed raising medium or into the hole in the ground that they're planting the tree or the shrub into. So we think of biochar as going into those places to create carbon sinks and to order add some value towards making the soil more resilient.
Okay. Yeah. All right, while we're on this topic of the Good Carbon Farm, can you give us a little bit more of an overview exactly how it works?
Sure, yeah. Well, in a nutshell, which of course you can make into biochar, the Good Carbon Farm, really, we gift biochar to school and community gardens and horticulture and conservation projects to add into their operations. So there's already these great projects going on out there that are, related to food security, to regenerative farming, to conservation, climate change, all sorts of good things going on. So the
Yeah.
Good Carbon Farm really is a way of adding a little bit of extra good into the good that's already going on, rather than trying to establish a whole lot of projects ourselves
Uh-huh.
from scratch. So we're interested in being able to upcycle that green waste into biochar to make it into something useful. And putting it back into the ground is naturally where it should go. And so when it's in the ground, we know it has a lot of compounding benefits for the users of that biochar. And it's also creating that lovely carbon sink and doing its best to mitigate climate change at a very, very grassroots, accessible level.
So do you search and reach out to these community organizations, or do you wait for them to contact you, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, in the first instance, we ran our first project in the Upper Hutt area, which is where we're based.
Yeah.
The Upper Hutt City Council provided us with a grant to run a project with one of our first carbon farmers, who's also in the area, to look at converting forestry slash into biochar and then gifting that biochar to community gardens in the area. So we did that a couple of years ago, and just to kind of test our model and to see how the gardens, see what kind of vibe we got from them really, and how, whether or not there was interest in using the biochar, how much did they know about it, how much work was it going to be for them, because these projects are generally volunteer run. They have pretty, minimal resources. So we didn't want to add a whole lot of work to the work that they were already doing.
Mm.
Then we ran a similar project in Auckland and we had connected with an organization called Oki at that point. And Oki build gardens in schools, mostly around South Auckland. And we connected also with a group of nurseries called Restoring Takarunga Hauraki. And we had a project that was funded by the Mazda Foundation. So we did that last year. We sourced the biochar from other carbon farmers that were in the area. So we're not, trucking biochar across the country because that's not something that we want to do. So we'll only run a project in an area where there is someone to make the biochar or to supply it and someone to use it and put it into the ground in one of those, school or community projects.
Cool. So you're basically the connectors or the networkers between producers and then the end user, and you're just facilitating that process of getting product from one to the other. And how did it go? In those kind of two major projects that you've done, how much extra work was it for volunteers to do, and how much did you have to do, like an educating type thing? Like, did you physically have to go there, or were you able just to do it through having a spoken conversation or email? Or can you give me a little bit more of the finer detail of how did it
Yeah, yeah.
actually go?
Well, with the first project, I mean, it was new to all of us. So we went to the gardens. We did the delivering of the biochar to the gardens, and they were
Mm.
all in our local area anyway.
Yeah.
So we had, face-to-face contact, and we recommended that the gardens was simply adding the biochar to their compost. So it wasn't a whole lot of extra work. There was
Mm.
one garden that started to run an experiment on, they had quite a large composting operation. So they had an experiment going where they added biochar to one compost and not to another and did a comparison of how the biology was behaving in those two compost heaps. And they were also connected with a soil scientist who could gather the samples and have a look at them under a microscope and that kind of thing. And that was super interesting, to see
Yeah.
that the compost with the biochar, behaved quite differently to the one without. And even the guy who was monitoring the heaps was really surprised he'd not heard of biochar. He was a soil expert. So, it's engaging at that level is really important. And it's also helped us, I guess, develop resources and systems and advice for how we engage with the gardens, and how much information we give them
Mm.
because they don't really want to know loads and loads of information. It's a bit like going back to that, science happens thing where you don't want to bog people down with a whole lot of technicalities. And in Auckland, we actually went to Auckland for that project just because we felt it would be important for us to physically be there. And we did some comms and some outreach around those projects. So with the nursery project, we ran a little hui with them where they invited a number of other people in their nursery sort of network and ecosystem to come and sit and take some samples of biochar and to ask questions. And we had a meal together. And that was really beneficial, I think, with just, having a really straight up Q&A. We had one of our carbon farmers there with us, and that was really beneficial thing to do. But again, for us to be flying around the country doing those things in person isn't necessarily sustainable. So we're starting to do things more online and connect our carbon farmers with the projects so that they are the ones going to the community gardens or to the schools and having a physical presence if that's warranted.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to turn them both in from producers, but also turn them into educators as well, so that they can have the skills to be able to communicate and yeah, and teach the people what it's all about and answer their questions and stuff. Okay. Yeah, nice. Yeah, that sounds really great. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
And have you got any projects coming up that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, we're involved with, I guess, quite a few different interesting projects right now with the Good Carbon Farm. So we've started collaborating with Enviro Schools. So
Mm,
Enviro Schools is a New Zealand-wide program that involves schools making some kind of a commitment to incorporate sustainability actions into their teaching and learning. And so, of course, there are many different kind of environment and climate change related actions that the schools can choose to take. Many of them set up gardens to grow food on the school grounds and to teach the students how to become gardeners and grow and harvest and prepare their own food. So our collaboration with Enviro Schools, it kicked off last year with a workshop in the South Island, which one of our directors, Dennis Enright, he's also one of our carbon farmers, ran about incorporating biochar into soil use to grow food, which we got some really great feedback about. The students loved it, the teachers and the staff loved it, and we've since met with a number of the school coordinators and expect to start providing some biochar and some teaching resources to schools interested in adding it into their gardens later this year. So that's something we're pretty excited about.
mm,
And again, it's that whole model of working with someone established who's already doing a whole bunch of great things and just adding a little bit of extra to what they're already doing. Another project we've been working on is a trial to convert organic cotton clothing that has reached its end of life into biochar. That's been a multi-stakeholder collaboration between the Good Carbon Farm, one of our carbon farmers, the company that produced the clothing, a university, and a number of biochar experts and soil scientists. So that's still a work in progress, but again, pretty interesting. Another project in the works is a collaboration with an organization called the Tolaga Bay in Charitable Trust. So Tolaga Bay is out on the East Cape of New Zealand. And they're the brains and energy behind a project called Slash for Cash that was
mm.
established after Cyclone Gabrielle devastated the community. We know the story that there were a lot of issues with forestry slash.
Yeah.
So the team out there is doing some great work to repurpose some of that displaced forestry slash into biochar, and that's then used to regenerate productive farmland, and it's also creating meaningful employment for the whānau involved in doing that work, and that's something that's also very socially important to that area. They've recently built a mobile kiln that can be taken to sites where problematic biomass is available. So where that slash is just there, they can cook it into biochar on site. Science happens, and we think that's a really smart way of working. We really like their model. So we're hatching plans to work together once the kiln is up and running. I mean, it may be running now or just very close to up and running. And a couple of other projects I'll mention that we're going to launch imminently is or are the Good Carbon Store and something called the Good Map. So the Good Carbon Store is an online e-card service that we've set up for people and organizations to support our work. And it's inspired by Oxfam's Unwrapped e-card service. So it's essentially a tax deductible donation to the Good Carbon Farm and brings us some sustainable income. It was a project that was funded by Upper Hutt City Council through something called a sustainability stimulus grant and led by a Bachelor of Communication student from Massey University, Maria Williams, who completed an internship with us last year. And the link is actually live on our website now. We just haven't formally launched it yet, but it's all up and running. And the Good Map is an interactive map that is showcasing where we work, who we work with, who our funders and supporters are, who are the supporters, especially of our Good Carbon Store as well. And that map was created in the last few weeks by a group of Masters of Software Development students from Victoria University, Wellington, Skylar Sinclair, Sarah Boddington, Thomas Trollope, Roxanne Amasi, and Jeanette Tong, and we'll soon can have that accessible on our website, which I should mention is thegoodcarbonfarm.com. And you can have a look at our work on Instagram and LinkedIn as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because one of my upcoming questions that I was going to ask was how do you fund paying the producers to make the biochar that you then gift to other people? So you've answered that by, well, initially you got one grant, and then now you've got this. Basically, it sounds like if I want to support you guys, I can then buy one of these e-cards, send it to someone that I care about, and say to them, look, I've made this donation on your behalf to support the Good Carbon Farm, that then basically pays for biochar to be sequestered in the soil and improve the soil. Am I correct in that brief
Yeah.
summary?
Absolutely, that's an excellent brief summary off the top of your head. So yeah, so we have had a couple of grants to support a couple of projects, and some of our carbon farmers, they are happy to gift the biochar, and so of course, that would be in exchange for maybe some joint communications or a different kind of collaboration where we honour how they've supported the work of the Good Carbon Farm. But absolutely, like we need to pay people for what they're producing. Not everyone can afford to make it and gift it to our work. So yeah, we felt that setting up the store would be a way of bringing in some sustainable income. But also we've continued to apply for some grants as well.
Hmm. Okay. All right, Joany, I've got another question for you. I'm doing some work for the Riverton Environment Centre, where one of our main focuses is on education, and we host a couple of festivals each year where there's a weekend of lots and lots of different workshops involving, well, one's a harvest festival, so it's all about harvest, and the other one is about bountiful backyards, so it's all about growing food. And I was talking to my colleague last week, and we said to each other, well, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if there was a way for us to offset the kind of carbon emissions of the festival? Is there a way that we could be carbon neutral or something? So, would that work with the Good Carbon Farm? Like, is there a way that we could calculate our carbon footprint of a festival and then purchase some of those e-cards, make a donation to the Good Carbon Farm in order to buy some biochar that would then be sequestered to do an offset?
Offsets and carbon emissions and all of those calculations, it's quite complex. And we've stayed away from, I guess, from that
Uh-huh.
part of the biochar story. There are lots of calculators that you can use and organizations that probably can give you a reliable carbon calculation and offset and all of that stuff. But because of the nature of our work, we're getting biochar from many different sources. It's being used in different ways. We really have no way of calculating that information. For now, it's something that we would like to do in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's just very complex and also quite cost prohibitive to do. So we are very mindful of not offering or promising any kind of carbon offset. We're offering something else. If you're supporting our work, we're using that funding to create biochar, which is saving some of the carbon emissions that would otherwise, go back into the atmosphere from green waste that was just left to rot in place wherever it is, and you're contributing to the biochar going back into the ground, creating more resilient soil, that, the advantages that that gives to the school or the community garden or whatever project that's using that biochar, and that kind of ongoing, that circularity around that. And also helping to create this little carbon sink. And carbon sinks are powerful in many ways, not just because they're storing carbon for a very long time in a safe way. But I think there's that nice tangibility around biochar. You know, you're actually making carbon that you can see and touch and use. And I think that's quite powerful too, you know, from a climate anxiety perspective as well. You know, there's so much walk and not enough talk. This is a way that, you know, you can actually make climate impact tangible.
Mm.
Sorry, that was a really long answer, I think, to your question, and not maybe not specific enough. But no, you can't offset your carbon with us in a way that we can, you know, calculate reliably.
Okay. No, that's fair enough. No, I mean, to be honest, I have done some of those calculations myself. For example, did a blog post on my own little website and I wanted to work out my carbon footprint for a year. And even although I live a very low consumer lifestyle where I try not to buy things that I don't really need, I try not to buy the want. I buy the things that I really do need, and I try and buy secondhand and so on. And try not to fly. It was actually a bit scary how much biochar I had to make to offset one normal year, and that was me, not my partner. And my partner has connections. You know, she's from Taiwan, so every so many years she does take a flight back home, and sometimes she has family visit us, and I didn't put her in the calculations, but it is quite a bit scary how much biochar I need to make just to offset my own carbon footprint. But anyhow, it is a complicated thing, and it's difficult to quantify the cascading benefits. So the way I figure it is, even if I make a small percentage of the theoretical amount of carbon to offset, the cascade of benefits is very, very difficult to measure. And so for me, I'm happy even if I'm making 10% of what I should be making to offset it, and putting that in my soil, putting it through animals and so on. So I think what I would do, because this has just kind of clarified things for me, is maybe try and do my own calculation using one of the online calculations for our event, and then just go to my local producer, my local biochar maker, and then see how much it would cost to buy some from him, and then find local projects that we can put the biochar into. So at the school where we do the festival, there is a community and a school garden. So I could make a donation there and put it in the compost. And yeah, you've inspired me, Joany. So I think I'm gonna
Ah,
steal a little bit of your model, and I'm all about localization as well. I don't want to be buying stuff from the North Island and getting it shipped here. And so our local producer is only 2 hours away. So that's to me local enough to warrant it. And, you know, they can probably do the drop when they're traveling past doing other stuff. So, all right, I'm going to make that happen. And yeah, I think we need these kinds of trends to be set and for it to become a new normal where when we do events and festivals and stuff, we make an effort to do something at least, even if, you know, it's plant 5 trees or buy some biochar. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but it's a signal that we're caring it, we're thinking about it, isn't it?
yeah, and it's better than doing nothing. And again, for the average person, you know, climate change and mitigation and footprint and calculations, you know, it's all very overwhelming, and people are occupied just with the day-to-day business of being a human being. So there's not a lot of extra headspace to engage with, again, with this topic that can be very technical and unstimulating, you know, and that creates a kind of a barrier to participation. So
Yeah.
just the easier you can make it for people using a very positive optics and language, I think the better. You know, it's
Mm.
something anyone can participate in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. And that kind of leads into my next question is, what do you think is needed in New Zealand to make biochar a more household topic. There anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't already mentioned?
Well, I'm not a marketing expert, though I think in order to make, anything a household name, you either need a massive scandal or a celebrity or influencer endorsement or a very big communications budget and access to a lot of resources. So for biochar, I think becoming a household name, that's not necessarily going to increase its production and use because I mean you can talk about it all you want. It's whether or not it's being made and used is what actually matters.
Yeah. All right, I think that's the end of all my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to offer or bring up or talk about? I'll give you free mic.
Oh, free mic. No, look, I think I'm good. Like, thank you for the time, really, and the opportunity to have this chat with you. And I look forward to hearing more of your episodes with other people in I guess, the biochar scape in the future. So,
Great.
thanks, Dylan.